Gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Casten, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Always a pleasure to see you, and appreciate your time here today. I want to start with this chart in your monetary policy report, which I think is fascinating. Chart 14 on page 17. This is this history of wage growth and job growth. And for those of you who don't have it in front of you, broadly speaking, from 2000 to 2017, we had more workers than jobs. From 17 until the COVID crisis, it was about the same. And since COVID, we've had more jobs than workers. And there's tons of rich stuff in here that I just enjoyed reading. But broadly speaking, if that was the only thing going on in the economy, I would assume that we had 20 years where it was essentially a buyer's market for labor, and the last year and a half where it's been a seller's market for labor, as you look at that. And if I go through and I look at from 2010 to 2020, CPI was up 20% over the period, and real median wages less than 10%. So for half of the economy, they didn't keep up with wages, even though we think of that as a very low inflationary period. Corporate profits were also up strongly, as you would expect. I'm not saying that with judgment, right? If it's a buyer's market for labor, you would expect the gains from labor productivity to flow to consumers and profits, and that looks like what it did.
Which chart are you looking at?
This is chart 14 on page 17 of the monitor. It's the top right corner there.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
In the last year and a half, median wages are up 5%, which is almost as much as they grew during that 10-year period before. And yes, inflation is still a bit higher than that. But what I'm wondering is, as you look at the economy, is wage growth universally bad in your view, or is wage growth good to the extent that it's keeping up with wages? Because historically, wages didn't keep up. And how do you think through that nuance? Because interest rates are a very blunt tool. And if you agree with me that we're now basically in a seller's market for labor, shouldn't we expect and welcome some wage inflation that goes with that?
So I'd say two things. First, we want wages to go up in ways that are consistent over time with the increase in productivity and inflation, and that makes all the sense in the world. The other thing I would say is that in this instance, what we've seen is inflation eating up these very high nominal wage gains have very largely been eaten up by higher inflation. So it's very important that we restore price stability so that we can start to see real wage gains after inflation across the income spectrum.
Yeah, no, and to be clear, we're all opposed to inflation here, but in that 2010 to 2020 period that we all viewed as a very low inflationary period, the gains from productivity did not flow to labor. Wages did not keep up with inflation. And we didn't think about that as a problem for the Fed to fix because overall inflation was down. So, this gets sort of theoretical, but let's say that we had 6% wage inflation and 5% CPI. There'd be more money in people's pockets, but would we view that as a inflationary period to clamp down on? Because we didn't view the inverse as a problem, if you will.
So our job is to restore price stability and keep price stability. It isn't to keep wages down, and it's certainly not to get involved in trying to establish the appropriate level of labor share of profits, for example. That's not the way we think about it at all. We think about price stability, and when we think about price stability, we think about wages as an important input to that. But we're not targeting a particular level of prices, and we would never say that we don't want real wages to go up. What we're really charged with is price stability, and to do that, we have to think about wages. But in particular, no one at the Fed would be upset to see the labor share go up, but that's not something that our policies affect. That's set by globalization and the advance of technology and educational and skills and aptitude and all those things. That's what drives productivity. That's what drives labor share.
Yeah, and it's hard to have these conversations in 5 minutes, I realize.
Happy to follow up.
I guess what's hard is that also in that 2010 to 2020 period, median home prices went up by 50%. Yeah. We didn't view that as inflationary. 401ks went up a lot. We didn't view that as inflationary because those were asset increases. And so as we have shifted the gains from, from people who had wealth to people who were dependent on wages, there needs to be some correction, and I leave it there because I'm out of time, but how we think about that.
Gentleman's
would be
time has
helpful. Thank you.
expired.
Go back.
We'll now go to the gentleman from Tennessee.